Well, good
Hello.
afternoon, everyone. Welcome, Dan Boeck. His name is Dan Boeck. The O is silent. I just learned that as I was calling him the wrong name, and I'm not going to say that so it doesn't get stuck in your head. But I am really excited to introduce him today. Call to Peace Ministries has grown rapidly in the last year. And we were just praying, and we're like, you know what? We need another church partner liaison on our staff. So we were praying, and we were praying for this for a while. And so today we now have 3 church partner pastors, like church partners that are also pastors. They serve in the role of helping churches untangle domestic abuse and helping women advocate within their own church for themselves with their pastors. It's very helpful to have a lot of these men come along with you and be able to communicate to your pastor what you're going through. So I'm going to let him introduce himself and tell more about his role here at Call to Peace Ministries.
Yeah. Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate that. I spent the past almost 30 years, 27 years in youth and family ministry. And so family relationships, the marriage relationships have really been a central focus of mine for several decades. And yet for a lot of those years, I didn't really understand domestic abuse. I believed a lot of the common myths that are out there that, it's kind of limited to physical assaults, or maybe is the consequence of rage or anger, that it's just a marriage problem. And then a couple of years ago, our family began walking through really 2 different domestic abuse situations that were involving our loved ones. And these situations were really surprising. They were confusing, gut-wrenching, and I began to realize fairly quickly that I didn't understand as much about domestic abuse as I really thought I did. And so I started some initial research online, but realized very quickly I needed to do a lot more studying. So I ended up ordering about 8 or 10 different books on the subject. And it was through that study that I began to see how a lot of the things that I believed about abuse were wrong and maybe even harmful. I guess for example, I began to see that abuse comes in many forms. It's not limited to physical assaults, and really is just a form of oppression that God hates. Began to understand that it's far more prevalent in our society and even in the church. And yet it's this hidden sin, in some ways, maybe even hidden in plain sight. Learned that it's not a marriage conflict, but really is something that resides in the heart of the abuser alone. His desire for self-worship and self-gratification. He wants the world the way he wants it to be, and feels justified in doing whatever is necessary to make it and keep it that way. How victims are controlled and manipulated, and how a lot of victims will say that the emotional abuse is far worse and far more damaging than any physical assaults that may come along. And also, and maybe this is the area that I began to see the biggest need, is that for churches, for a lot of different reasons, are prone to making things worse for victims by not believing them, not supporting them,
Absolutely.
and maybe even unwittingly kind of empowering the abuser and supporting the abuser instead. And so anyway, as all these situations of abuse kind of played out in our family, we came to see not only the impact on the victims themselves that the abuse was having, but the role that the church was playing in responding. In one situation, the church didn't respond very well at all. The abuser, like I mentioned, the abuser was empowered and the victim kind of further entrapped, and that results and has resulted in a lot of upheaval and pain, and caused some disillusionment with the church, with God for some members of the family. But then in the other circumstance, we were able to see how the church supported the victim, and just the profound difference that made in the victim's ability to recover and begin this healing process, how she's been well cared for, a lot of her needs have been met, and just how that resulted in her just being in a much better place, particularly spiritually, as well. So I guess really it's our own experience with abuse, seeing kind of the positive and negative interactions with the church, and coming to understand the incredible need for people to speak for victims. My wife and I felt like we couldn't just sit on the sideline with this knowledge of and observing this happening kind of around us and not get involved. And so we really believe that God was calling us to get involved at this point. So here we are.
Wow. And I'm so glad you're here. And I love what you shared there about how women who are helped by their church, their healing process, I feel like I was helped by my church. So for me, spiritually, it was a lot easier for me to heal quicker. Not easier, because I believe God, I shouldn't say that. God heals everybody that comes to him. But for me, it didn't add to the layer of trauma I was already experiencing. And having my pastor say to me, I want you to know that not all men are like this, and that we care for you and we're going to protect you, just solidified in my mind and helped me still trust that there are good Christian men who desire to protect me. And that did a lot for my faith, because for me, if I view all men as evil and desiring to hurt me, then what does that say about Christianity and God? And so I feel like that is so important in the healing process, because God says that when we submit to him, we are loving people. That's what 1 John is all about. So even the same for a man that is submitted to Christ, he is loving. And so it was a huge healing process for me. So I appreciate, sorry to go off a little bit of a rabbit trail there, but I just think that's so important in the healing process, is if a man, pastor is willing to stand up for a woman, how much more that communicates the heart of God to her, as she's already traumatized. So right on there.
Well, I think the term that is often used is double abuse, right? Where the victim experiences abuse within the home, and then when she goes to the church to find support and care, and is essentially disbelieved and unsupported. I mean, it's like kind of a secondary level of abuse and rejection in that sense. So it's really important for the church to respond well.
Yes, so true. Definitely secondary trauma. It's sad to me and heartbreaking. I know many survivors that can't go to church, and I know a lot of pastors will hear that and say, why? Well, it was traumatizing for them, the way that their church treated them and the way the members of the congregation treated them, that it takes them a long time to heal. And not being able to be in that faith community to heal is a huge thing. We need each other. We do not need to be isolated from our faith community. And I see somebody asking for prayer. We will definitely pray for you. If anybody in here needs prayer, just let us know. We are always happy to pray for you by name. So we'll move on to our next question here. How did you get connected to Called to Peace Ministries?
So it's kind of a funny story, but it really has kind of grown over the past year and a half or so, my relationship with Called to Peace. It actually first started when I first began researching domestic abuse online. I came across the Called to Peace website in one of my searches, so there's good news for you there. But I found a lot of resources online that just, as someone who was coming with a lot of incorrect beliefs and needing information, Called to Peace was one of the organizations that really helped in that regard. But then I also had noticed that Joy Forrest had written a book. And so when I ordered all those books to begin reading, hers was one of the first books I ordered and read. And then after that kind of initial introduction and education, I eventually approached Call to Peace to gain some insight into these situations that we were facing as a family. And out of that, we started working with an advocate who made himself available to us. He would answer questions, allow us to express our emotions. He would pray with us and for us, provided counsel when we weren't really sure how to respond or how to handle some of the things that we were seeing. And then we also had some conversations with Jim Upchurch and found him to be really encouraging and helpful in that process of understanding abuse, but also the church's part and response to that. And so out of all of that, eventually my wife and I were encouraged to become victim advocates. And so we started that advocacy training program. And after a number of months in that course, that led into conversations about joining the team as a church partnership Liaison. And so here we are.
And we are so glad that you're here. We are so grateful for that. And that's wonderful. You found an advocate. Was that an advocate associated with Call to Peace Ministries? Just
Yes,
curious.
correct. Yep.
Okay. That's awesome. And yes, so anybody out there listening, Call to Peace Ministry provides at no cost to you advocates to be able to walk with you. And they've been through a year-long training program to understand the court systems and just kind of untangle domestic abuse. The amount of training they have had with domestic abuse and what it is phenomenal. So please always reach out to Call to Peace if you would like an advocate as well. And then what training did you have to help you better understand domestic abuse in the church and its impacts on women that experience it?
Yeah, well, I'm still learning. I feel like I'm never going to get to the point that some of these professionals are, but I would say that there's been some formal training and some very informal training. The formal, a lot of it has come through Call to Peace and the advocacy course that we've been walking through. That advocacy training is in conjunction with Dr. Deborah Wingfield and the House of Peace. Involves, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 100 hours of training class time over the course of a year. And so we're a little over halfway through that, I believe. But then I've also been able to take advantage of a number of the conferences and seminars that have been put on by Call to Peace over the last number of years, and also by individuals like Chris Moles and Darby Strickland and others who have worked in this realm for many, many years, and just a wealth of wisdom and insight into this complex issue. And then informally, as I mentioned, I've done a lot of self-directed study, a lot of reading, read lots of books, lots of articles, lots of scholarly studies on the whole subject. I've been privileged to interact with a number of professionals, a lot of law enforcement actually. These would be individuals who actually train law enforcement, and so being able to gain some understanding and insight into that realm. But one of the more interesting things, I think, that I don't think it just kind of happened is in talking with victims and listening to their stories and coming to understand what has helped them, what has made things worse for them, as they've walked through this. And I guess one of the things that's been kind of interesting is, as people have learned that we're getting involved in this area, people have, survivors, victims have come to us and shared their stories, and I would say almost weekly we end up interacting with a victim and listening to her story and all that. And so we've learned a great deal from these women, and coming to understand their experiences and just really the courage that they've had to face what they've had to go through.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm so grateful that you're advocating for them. And that's a huge part I want people to understand that we offer with Call to Peace. If there's women out there who are like, really want to be able to talk to their pastor and don't really know how to communicate what's going on, we have somebody here like Dan Beck who is willing to help you advocate for yourself with your pastor, and who also understands domestic violence and the ins and outs of it with the legal system, and training from a pastor's perspective to be able to walk with you through the process. Because ideally we love for churches to be able to understand and be able to help these women and be a safe place for them. So we are grateful for you and what you're doing. What do you hope to be able to do through your role at Call to Peace, connecting with pastors?
Yeah, like I said, I know I have a lot more to learn as I kind of grow into this role, and I look forward to continuing to learn from Joy and Jim and Andre and everybody else that's on this team. But, I guess moving forward, there's 3 things that I would hope I could see happen. First, obviously in my role, I want to be effective in supporting churches through this process of responding well. Domestic abuse is a very complex, counterintuitive, difficult issue, and it's very easy to misread what's happening or even to miss it altogether. And so if I can be a part of helping churches through that and helping them respond well to victims and those issues, that'd be a real blessing. The second thing is just maybe more directed at pastors and church leaders, just to come to a greater awareness of just how prevalent abuse is. I talk about it as being kind of this hidden pandemic, and I think to understand just how underreported it is, and even with the underreporting, the almost frightening statistics that relate to that, where 1 in 3 women will experience abuse in their lifetime. And so it's a far bigger issue than what a lot of people understand. And so out of that, then not only understanding how prevalent it is, but understanding what the needs of victims are and how to care well for them, practically, spiritually, and all of those things. And I think the third thing would be that as we talk, that I really would like to be a voice for the victims of oppression, and kind of stand in opposition to this sin. I believe doing so is ultimately a reflection of God's heart, and is part of what it means to care for the least of these, like as described in Matthew 25, where we're to care for other believers who are in need, and failing to do so is going against God's heart. And so, so I guess those three things.
Wow. And thank you for sharing that. And that's, I appreciate that about you, and that you're part of our team, and that you have a heart, because that's so important. Sometimes I think so many pastors do have a heart, but they don't understand how to help these women. Or they may say, absolutely. I've heard, pastors say they should call the police. And it's like, well, actually, that's really probably not helpful a lot of the times. And sometimes it can really put things a lot worse, and there's a lot more ins and outs to that. So I think it's so important, if you are a pastor listening and you have a heart to work with women who are in domestic abuse, that you have somebody like Pastor Boeck here come alongside you and help you untangle it and understand it, and understand how to love this woman as she walks through it. Because otherwise, my pastor himself and other people watch them, it will be very overwhelming, because it's so hard to understand. And this guy is not going to be like, oh yeah, I abused her. It's going to be completely tears. I'm so sorry. I hit her. I won't do it again. And then a month later, you're back in there, so it's just going to be, it's so challenging to be able to work through this. So we are so grateful that you are here to be able to help pastors understand this, and be able to help women and support them. I think it's huge to a lot of women that there is a man, and then we have other male advocates as well that are willing to advocate for them.
Yeah, no, and I think, to your point, there's a lot of like I was in that same position where there's these common myths that people believe, that it really is just kind of ignorance about the issue, and it's not always willful ignorance. It's just ignorance, and I think there's a lot of pastors that are trying to do the right thing, but because they don't understand the complexities and the issues there, they make a lot of missteps that end up harming victims. And so, if I can help be a part of correcting that, that'd be fantastic. So,
yes, I agree. Well, I shall be sharing more of her story, but recently was working with a woman who was saying that she had told her pastor something, and he went and actually confronted her husband. And that is one of the worst things you can do, because then he acts like, oh yeah, everything's fine. When you got home, she paid wrath for that, and the abuse ramped up, and he's going to isolate and control her more. And so a lot of times pastors are like, okay, yeah, I'm going to confront this man, but they have to understand men that are abusers are not like normal men. They're not like them. And I think it's easy to project our own goodness on other people and assume that, oh yeah, he just doesn't know, I'm just going to confront him. And you have no idea this guy is going to then use that as ammunition to take that out on her. So it's like understanding, how do you deal with this? How do you confront it? And there is a safe way to do that within a church. And that's what we are here to help you do.
Yeah. Another one is even just, why doesn't she leave if it's that bad? And they don't understand the entrapment behind that. So yeah, it's a complicated issue for sure.
Yes, when there's real domestic violence is either real or not, but when domestic abuse is going on, typically he's got a hold of her money, cars, everything else. I haven't met many women that have not been controlled financially. Either all their work money is being funneled to him, or they aren't allowed to even work. So you are asking a woman to flee. Most women who are homeless, I think it's 50% of them are women fleeing domestic violence with their children. So her fleeing could be homelessness. So as a church, you can step in and also and advocate for women and prevent homelessness in your community. And a lot of churches do want to prevent homelessness. Well, the first way you can start with that is by advocating for victims of domestic abuse and making it a safe place for them, as well as I see so many churches, I'm going on here, it's hitting me, sorry, talk about wanting to protect women and unborn pregnant children and protect unwed mothers or women, children from being aborted. Sorry, I can't get the words out in the moment. But so much of that is actually women who are having abortions is because they're in domestic abuse and they don't know where else to turn and how else to deal with it. So many ways these churches want to partner and help reduce abortions, help reduce homelessness with women and children. But really, a lot of the root of it could be helped if they would advocate for victims of domestic abuse and understand it. And we're here to help, and it is a very complex issue. So I'm grateful for you and the work that you're doing, because you are not only protecting women, but you're also protecting children, because children are heavily affected by domestic abuse as well.
Yeah. There's certainly a ripple effect. It affects a lot of lives. So
yes, and it's the root of a lot of issues that go on in our society. And if you dealt with the root, sometimes some of the other things would be a lot easier to deal with. So is there anything else you wanted to share here?
yeah, maybe just one little comment kind of directed at fellow pastors, I guess. I know, having been in full-time ministry for almost 30 years, I know there's a lot of competing priorities and responsibilities and needs within any church. But given how domestic abuse is far more prevalent and complicated and counterintuitive than most people realize, I really think that it's important for pastors to take a good, serious, hard look at involving a ministry like Called to Peace in helping them navigate these issues, because given the statistics, it's very likely that abuse is occurring within your congregation. But it could be that victims aren't sure if it's even safe to come forward. And so, and as we've talked, and as we've already mentioned, responding poorly can put her at greater risk, and it can alienate her from the church and erode her faith in God and all kinds of things. And so it's really important for churches to respond well. Otherwise, they miss God's heart for the oppressed. And so, especially with October coming up, it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It's a good timing, good opportunity to take advantage of the opportunities that Call to Peace provides, the information, the church kits that we're offering for the month of October as well.
That's the first mention of them on Facebook. I was so happy you mentioned. I was going to say, let's tell people about this.
Yeah, that's right. I'll let you flesh that one out a little bit more. But I think that it's really important for pastors to and church leaders who are really serious about caring for those who need support and practical help to really consider seriously their willingness to learn and understand this issue. And so I think investing the time in learning about domestic abuse, in allowing Call to Peace to come alongside you in that, is never going to be something that you would regret. I don't think you'd ever look back and say, man, I wish I hadn't spent that time looking into all of this. And so I would just encourage you, pastor to pastor, to really take a good, hard, long look at Call to Peace Ministries and what we provide and the information that's out there and the resources that are available.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm so glad you led into that. I was just thinking that would be, I'm working on some stuff for Domestic Violence Awareness Month and researching, and something I found is that women are more likely to come forward if their pastor is willing to even address it from the pulpit in prayer, just praying for women who are in abusive homes or think they're in abusive homes. And if they're willing to talk about it even more so in their sermons or mention that, it breaks the silence, because it makes a woman feel like maybe she's in a safe place and she's willing to come forward and talk about it. So we have created for Domestic Violence Awareness Month a toolkit called a pastor's toolkit, and it is ways that pastors can weave into their morning message or be able to recognize, first off, October Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So be able to recognize October's Domestic Violence Awareness Month and be able to share some statistics and facts about domestic abuse from a scriptural perspective as well, and be able to hopefully shed light on this in their congregation and be able to have women who are trapped in the darkness of domestic abuse have light enter into that and be able to break forth and come forward and be able to share with their pastor or pastor's wife. And we are there to equip you if they do. We are there with Dan Beck that's willing to come in and talk to you and help you walk right alongside any of this. So we are very excited. And just one comment just says, God said, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So much damage is being done in churches in this area. God help us. Yes, very true. So we are hoping during Domestic Violence this month to spread knowledge of God's heart of oppression and God's heart for protecting those who are in oppression. So you'll have to stay tuned throughout the week to see when we release that to you and let you know that you can get it to your pastors. It is going to be phenomenal. There has been so many hours invested into this and so much time and research into different things. So we just cannot wait to share with you. Very, very excited. And you will be seeing Dan and other people throughout Domestic Violence Awareness Month as well as we talk about domestic abuse in the church. So thank you so much for being willing to join us today. Is there any closing remarks you would like to give?
I think that's all I got.
All right, you did awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you have any questions for Dan, or if you would like to reach out to him or we have 3 church partner liaisons. Any of them are willing to assist you in talking with your pastor, or if you're a pastor and would like help untangling domestic abuse, we are more than happy to come alongside you with training and resources that will equip you. So you can always reach out to us. I'll drop this in there, but church partners at calledtopeace.org would be how you contact us. So thank you so much for your time today and being willing to meet with us.
Thank you, Lauren.
I'm going to go ahead and end it.